This is Martin Giles of the Guildford Dragon News, and today I'm with Angela Richardson, the MP for Guildford. Angela, thank you for giving your time to be interviewed by the Guildford Dragon today.
Pleasure.
And welcome back.
Thank you.
So, how have you found your first year as an MP?
Well, I think we've got to wait till December for it to be first year, so we're about 10 months in now almost, and it's been equally challenging and rewarding. Nobody could have expected sort of to be dealing with COVID. Obviously, we came in with a big majority and had a huge agenda to get on with in terms of levelling up and investing in, to lots of different things, including schools and hospitals and our police service. But it's been very busy, and it's been a case of learning how to do a lot of new things and things for the first time and changing working practices. So, but I've really enjoyed the challenge, and at the same time, the opportunity to hear from a lot of constituents about the concerns and the issues that they've been facing, and then to try and put those concerns through to the relevant departments and ministers.
Okay, now you
represent them.
So we're going to come on to constituency work in a minute, but of course the COVID situation is something that no one could have forecasted in the general election, and we're going to talk about how that's affected your work. But in the meantime, you have taken on a role as a PPS for the education ministers, the private parliamentary secretary role. That's correct?
Yes.
So how much time does that take, and what does it involve?
Yeah, so, well, first and foremost, I am a constituency MP, and that is my focus, to try and raise those issues in Parliament. But I'm the private parliamentary secretary to the education ministers, so not to the Secretary of State, but I have 5 ministers, and they cover just a range of different things and have huge portfolios. And of course, education has been in the spotlight, especially over the last several months. Probably since we went into lockdown, and even right through to this day. So it just means that I have to work longer every day than maybe some of my other colleagues do, although I'm not saying that they don't work very hard, but I have to fit in the sort of the extra time. And so my role is it's a liaison role between backbenchers, cross-party, so not just Conservatives, and the ministers. So I end up supporting the ministers in all the debates that they have. So that could be the Westminster Hall debates, which are resuming next week, and I am on duty next week. Adjournment debates at the end of sittings. If there are ministerial statements, urgent questions, departmental questions, which come sort of every 6 weeks. And arranging surgeries for ministers, so that if colleagues have got concerns in their patches, or they want to talk about a particular school, or perhaps a new school that they want to build, or a school changing from being a local authority funded school into a multi-academy trust, or a new free school, special educational needs, universities.
Okay, I'm convinced, Angela. There's a lot to it, but
yeah. It was quite a lot for me to do over recess, especially with the A-level results. And I have to say, I'm quite passionate about it, having 3 children.
Okay.
And that ability to feed in my own personal experience as a mother, and going through it with an A-level daughter who was doing A-levels this year.
Yes.
Was really, really helpful on behalf of
and that whole A-level thing was a challenge, no doubt, for you.
Huge challenge.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, but I don't want to get off into that, because what I want to get back to is more constituency area. So we've heard about how much is involved in that role. Do you think that limits your time on the constituency work?
So, it could possibly, but I try and make sure I keep a balance with what I do. And so that means that every time there is a departmental question, I put into the ballot for it. If there are debates coming up where I can try and make the case for something on behalf of constituents, I do. I had an adjournment debate just before summer recess on a Southern Rail Heathrow link to Guildford, to try and boost the local economy. I'm always trying to get that balance right.
Okay, but because we have heard complaints, and there are some on social media, that Guildford constituents are not receiving replies from you to their letters and emails. Is that true?
So, there is a possibility that the odd email gets missed. And I would say in the first 5 months, as I was setting up the office, because I think people may not appreciate that you don't get any continuity. You have to start everything from scratch. You have no employees, and you don't get any casework handed over. There were a couple of urgent files that my predecessor's office manager, about 4 of them that were really urgent immigration cases, where she got GDPR consent to hand those cases over.
Right.
I was able to start with those, but unfortunately you start right from scratch. And setting that up and then having over 1,000 emails coming in a day at the start of lockdown was a challenge for 3 of us, because that's all it was then. But since probably the end of April, I've had an excellent operation running, and my team and I tell them to have the weekends off, but they do work extra hours over the weekend voluntarily because they care.
Okay.
And we've had a lot of really good feedback and thanks from constituents.
Okay,
and
so just
I have been challenged on social media, and I have asked, I've gone and searched out to see, what have been emailed, and I have asked constituents. I've given them permission to publicise my response. So sometimes it might be the case that people might not agree with how I respond to them, but by and large, the vast majority of emails, I would say, are being answered.
Okay, and should a constituent expect a reply to you if they write to you?
So I think there is almost an understanding out there that members of Parliament must respond to every single email that they receive. And we're not a local authority. I don't have a statutory duty to reply. If people Google what a Member of Parliament does, we are able to try and choose where we can make a difference. But I would say I try and reply to everybody, especially if they're constituents. And if it's urgent cases, I always prioritise it. But I have a comprehensive automated response that details everything out for constituents, where I can help. And I do ask for as much information as possible. And sometimes, constituents don't write back and give me their address. I need to confirm that they're my constituent.
But to quantify it, you say you get 1,000 emails every day?
So over the period of the most intense period of lockdown, up to probably about the end of April, I was receiving over 1,000 a day. At the moment, we're sort of more around about the 500, but that is quite a lot. Anecdotally, I can't give you an evidence base, but Guildford is a very busy constituency in terms of an inbox.
So at the moment, about 500, and letters on top?
Yes, but people don't write in by letter nearly as much as they used to. Yeah, so I would say that the vast majority come in by email, and they will be a mixture of people writing in with casework, and urgent casework sometimes, where people desperately need help. And then people write in on policy issues, so what the government's up to, things about coronavirus, maybe campaigns on issues, on bills that are going through the House. People want my support in one direction or the other. So, there's a lot of stuff that's coming in. And sometimes people just want information on what the government is doing on something. So we try and put together an information pack and send that out as well. Okay,
and how many in your private office to deal with that?
So at the moment, I have one caseworker, an office manager who tries to triage the inbox, and somebody who helps with the policy responses. And then I was able to offer a job to an intern on a short-term basis to give them their first working experience.
Okay, so that's 4, including the intern?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
So thanks. A small team.
So I think you're saying that you do wish to reply to everyone that writes to you?
Yes, and I will, and if we've missed anybody, then I just encourage them, please write in again. We're all human beings and we're not perfect, and sometimes the systems break down, but we'll do our very best to help those who need help, and we will prioritise those people over policy responses, which and we've got a timeline set up in place of about 10 working days.
Okay.
To try and get through, because it's a lot, especially on that policy side. People are writing in probably more on that.
Okay. Now let's switch to planning. It remains an issue in Guildford, and strong feelings, I think, around the issue, and not just Guildford town, across the whole your constituency, down in Cranley too, certainly. What do you say to those who find the amount of development outlined in the local plan, in both Guildford and the Waverley local plans, too much? that there's too much development, especially of green space?
So I can fully understand those concerns, and they're not new concerns. I think we've been with them for many years. But I stood on a manifesto that talked about delivering housing, and I stood on a local pledge as well to deliver housing in the right place at the right price for local people, recognising that families who have lived in Guildford and in the Waverley Park for their lives, and they've got children and grandchildren, they don't want to see them moving out. Affordability is an issue here because, the prices are high. We've also got key workers, we've got teachers and people who work in a hospital who don't want to have to travel miles to get to work every day. So having the right housing is important. I would say that I've been having meetings with the Secretary of State, Robert Jenrick, recently over the planning white paper that's coming in. I know your questions about the local plan. And so obviously under the past administration, we had the local plan go through, and I do know that the current administration are looking at what they can do and whether they can challenge that. The only thing I would say is we need to be careful what we wish for by undoing a process, because we could end up with an entirely different sort of development that maybe is inappropriate for Guildford. And I would say that would be high rises. I know some of my colleagues in other seats, that's what they're contending with at the moment, and that would not be appropriate in Guildford.
Okay, so you've preempted a couple of my questions there. I'll leave high rise to one side for the moment.
Okay.
But the new act that's coming through, what impact is that going to have on the adopted local plan here?
So it's a consultation process at the moment. So there's no actual, there's nothing being put forward in terms of legislation at the moment. Can I just, before I answer that, can I go back and say that in my conversations with the Secretary of State, I have said to him that developers need to be incentivised or penalised, whatever tools we have in our kit, to build out existing planning permissions before we start talking about additional housing numbers. We need to put protections in place for countryside beyond the green belt, because it doesn't have protection, and that's what Cranley, it's been a real issue for them because they don't have green belt protection.
And for ash.
Yeah. And we need to analyse. I asked, can we have long enough to analyse the impact that COVID has had on working conditions for people? Because I believe we're going to see a lot of commercial space and potentially retail space that will become vacant. And I want to see that utilised properly and have a change of use before we put any more housing in any sorts of green spaces at all. And I also asked the challenging question, do we have a housing crisis or do we have a lending crisis? Because actually it's really important to recognise that young people are struggling to get the deposits together that the banks require in order to get a mortgage. So we need to address that as well. So there are lots of issues that feed into this. With the planning white paper that's coming forward, I believe that's closing very, very soon, the consultation. People need to feed in as much as they possibly can, and my colleagues have, and I have been in meetings. I think the most important thing is about having local representation, and you talked about would neighbourhood plan. I think you might have asked me in an email whether neighbourhood plans would be involved in that, and I believe that new paper would strengthen local engagement and strengthen the weight of those when it comes to planning. Guildford, I don't think their numbers they talk about an algorithm on affordability with this new planning. And because it's expensive in Guildford and in London and the South East, the numbers look like a disproportionate effect in these areas. But I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that the government's got a massive levelling up agenda, and they want to see this housing go into the Midlands and up into the North. And so there's a conversation there and a balance that needs to be put in place. So I think whilst the numbers don't look great at the moment in terms of additional housing, we need to look at how this can be tweaked for the levelling up agenda. And I don't think we would see quite so many houses coming into London and the South East.
But you're probably aware of a recent report that shows Guildford's given up more of its green belt area than nearly all other boroughs. Aren't you concerned about that?
So that's under the previous local plan, or the current local plan under the previous administration. There are other boroughs and districts that haven't gone through the process yet. So they've not had the green belt to give up, I suppose. And if you are giving up areas of green belt, you should be looking to try and put other areas into the green belt to mitigate. There should always be mitigation. That's really important. Obviously, I wasn't involved in putting together the local plan. I understand the frustration and that is there with it. But the only thing I would caution with anything going forward, any decisions that are made, there are always consequences on either side. And so any good, effective administration will be looking at what are the unintended consequences of changing something that's already in place. We just have to be really, really mindful of that we don't end up losing anything more. But at the moment, I signed a joint letter with neighbouring colleagues to Natural England to look at trying to protect areas of outstanding natural beauty and great landscape value, and also bringing forward the Surrey Hills review.
Okay, you said about we need houses for the younger generation, but there's nothing that's going to protect these houses for them, is it? That they'll just go to the highest bidder.
So I would say within that sort of free market kind of a way of doing things, then yes, these houses do get built. But if you're trying to put in an element of affordability, I think that's really important. And I'm very happy to have discussions with colleagues just to try and make sure that we can get local people into those houses.
But shouldn't the government be helping local authorities build more social housing, which can be ring-fenced for local people?
So I think that's definitely a discussion that we can have. And, one of the other things that I stood on as a local pledge was about homelessness and trying to make sure that we can tackle that. And I want to make sure that we've got appropriate housing in place, for people who are really, really struggling, but not just the housing, but that transfer, from life on the streets and the support that they need then to be able to feel comfortable and happy in a home.
But so I think you said we can talk about that, but who's going to talk about it? Well, the social housing provision, I mean.
Yeah, well, it's a conversation. So I have meetings with housing providers. Lots of different companies who are providing social housing get in touch with me. I have meetings with them, and they lobby me on these matters.
But they'll only be worried about profit, won't they, Angela?
Not all of them. Some of them have that social conscience where they are trying to reinvest the profit back in and make sure.
Okay, but if these developers really had a social conscience, they wouldn't have left that site at the bottom of Portsmouth Road vacant for 25 years, would they?
Well, I think that's a disgrace, quite frankly, and I know my predecessor raised that in a Westminster Hall debate, and I'm quite happy to carry on the work that she was doing.
But it needs legislation, doesn't it? I mean, you need to upset your housing developer friends and say, look, there's going to be a penalty here.
So that was the first point I raised with you in terms of what I was discussing with the Secretary of State. I said we need to have either incentives or penalties for developers if they don't build out existing planning permissions. Okay,
good. Well, we'll watch that. That's now switching to local authority and the system of government here. What's your position on the Surrey County Council leader's proposal for a single unitary authority for Surrey?
So that's been quite an interesting discussion to be watching, and I've been watching it not only at a Surrey level but at a national level as well, because obviously this devolution white paper is something to affect the whole country, and there are places in the country that really want it and places that aren't so keen on it, and I can see with the difficulties we've had with coronavirus and the huge amount of money that's had to be invested into local government in order to keep the services going because the income has been depressed, this is going to be a long-term issue. So in terms of a unitary, I really could see the economies of scale and I could see the argument for saving money. And at the same time, I was very keen to make sure that we would never ever lose a local voice to so that communities would feel that they were represented in matters, especially planning. I think I could understand the real concerns around that. So I was supportive of those measures. Now, I have seen the reporting on your newspaper about it, and I did see the interview with Tim Oliver, who's the leader of Surrey County Council. And my understanding is there isn't a U-turn. that this isn't a change of heart by the government, it's simply a delay. But the Secretary of State has been quite clear, because I asked straight away what was going on, and I was advised that he says wherever people want it, it will go ahead. But I think that is the caveat, is people have got to want it.
Well, that's a good point, isn't it? So how do you test whether the people of Surrey, who, let's face it, they're the ones that are going to be subject to this governance, how should we test what they actually want?
So what's interesting is that the representatives at county level of all parties had reforming local democracy as part of their commitment. So they were all agreed on that local democracy needed reforming. It was more of a question of what sort of size, what would it look like? Was it going to be a single unitary, or were there going to be several? And so having a full consultation process as part of that. I would stop short at having a referendum, because they're very expensive, but widely consulting on the issue is very important. But I think also just making sure that there's local engagement at a really micro local level, so that people feel that their local issues and concerns are understood. The one thing I would say on the argument of single unitary versus several unitaries is, if you've already got structures in place that deliver things over 1.2 million people, like adult social care, and like education and special educational needs, and strategic transport infrastructure, then you've got to be careful about breaking those up into smaller levels. And there was also a real concern that however you divided up the county, there would be parts that would be wealthier than others, and you wouldn't want to create parts of the county that would feel impoverished. So one of my concerns always with this is, I just want to make sure that residents still have that level of service that they have come to expect in Surrey and in Guildford and in Waverley, because I have gone and campaigned in other parts of the country where services aren't delivered, bins aren't collected and emptied, and they pile up. And I that is one of my concerns around funding for the future. Having gone through COVID, we can't keep opening up the money chest and keep giving out money for every single need that we come across. There are going to have to be some tough decisions taken at national level, and tough decisions taken by our boroughs and our districts and our county. And so this is a much bigger conversation that we need to have as part of our recovery from COVID too. So okay. I think residents just need to be aware of what's going on, and if there is if consultation is taken on this in the future, about what are the big things that we need to achieve for residents in terms of services, and how much is it going to cost.
Okay. Now, I think actually it wasn't us. I think Councillor Oliver himself referred to people seeing it as a U-turn, but nonetheless, what do you think is the timetable for this now? Because I mean, if you're going to have a proper consultation, that's going to take some time for a start, isn't it?
Yeah, so I think the initial consultation that had been set up and was underway was due to conclude in this month. So that was my understanding of the timetable. It's now been pushed back. Obviously, government are trying to deliver on their agenda in every single department at the same time as they are trying to manage the pandemic. And we saw right at the beginning that a lot of things seemed to be put to one side so that departments could completely focus in on what they needed to deliver for people. Over the summer, we saw the numbers drop a bit, and we saw many, many more announcements coming through from departments. We've actually seen a change in personnel in MHCLG. So Simon Clark stood down. He was the minister in charge of actually delivering this devolution white paper. We have now got Luke Hall, who has moved into that position. He was looking after rough sleeping. And so it might be that there's just a change of personnel, and we need to then get this going again under the new minister.
But it's not going to happen before the county council elections, is it?
So my understanding is not. My understanding is that the county council elections are going to go ahead.
And
unless there is, we have a real problem with the pandemic, and we are not able to safely hold those elections.
I think most people would understand that. But so presumably there will have to be a clear policy in your in the Conservative manifesto at county level of what they want to do on this proposal.
Yeah, and I think, well, that will be up to the people writing that manifesto. That won't be me, unfortunately.
No, I understand that, but what I mean is people will have a chance to show what they think of it through that election.
Potentially, that depends on whether it's the main issue of the election coming up at county, or whether the more important things are sort of what we're delivering on education and on roads and on the Surrey active travel plan and that sort of thing. You know, it will be what really matters to residents.
Yeah, I agree. Of course it will, but the system of government is pretty fundamental to as a policy. So anyway, but as you say, the voters can make up their own mind on the manifestos presented to them. Now, hopefully this is a quick area, but we've seen the split of the Conservative group at Millmead into two groups of four, and one of them has broken away from the official Conservative label to form the Conservative Independents. Should those four councillors be allowed to remain as members of the Conservative Party? I know it's not your responsibility, but I'm interested in your view.
So it's not my responsibility. I'm completely outside of the whole process, and I'm leaving that process up to the party as it's an internal party matter. What I would like to see is everybody a Conservative councillor, and in fact see more Conservative councillors elected, both at the county elections coming up in 2021 and then the borough elections in 2020. Will it be 2023, I think?
Yes, and so for you, this is hands off. You're not
completely.
Okay, fair enough. And I would like to slip these next couple of questions in, but brief answers if you don't mind. So, how much does COVID affect your work up there at or not at Westminster necessarily? Your work as an MP?
So it has affected it. I just learned how to do everything, and then we went into lockdown. So if I take Westminster first, it completely changed the way that we were engaged in our sort of chamber work, and we weren't able to have anybody come into Westminster for those meetings that were happening regularly. So that all stopped. And we've got call lists now, which means you put into, so rather than just being in the chamber and being able to bob and try and catch the speaker's eye to have an opportunity to ask a question or to participate in a debate, you have to go into a ballot. It's the luck of the draw. So sometimes you can put in all the time and not get a chance to ask a question. The week coming up next week, I've managed to get in on an MHCLG question and a Department for Health and Social Care question, and I've put in for a debate on Thursday as well, a general debate on, I think it's to do with the help that DCMS have given the theatre and that sort of thing, which is very, very close to my heart in Guildford. And then there are times when you don't get in at all, which is really frustrating, and people are thinking, well, what's she doing? Why isn't she not representing us in Westminster? Well, unfortunately, I don't have much control over that other than regularly putting in to make sure I'm part of the process. My work in the constituency, it's been incredibly frustrating. In lockdown, we were all told to stay at home, protect the NHS and save lives. So that's what I did. I was at home. I wasn't out in the community. I was very cautious. I didn't want to be seen to be transmitting the virus or being a vector of the virus. And so I did everything on Zoom. And, as I said, my team and I were on our laptops answering emails 7 days a week, and especially during the absolute height of it. Now I'm able to go out and do a few more things, and so I've been out on Fridays meeting schools. I did actually meet a care home a couple of weeks ago to find out what their experience had been like. And whilst all my surgeries tend to be online, I have had constituents who don't have that flexibility, so I do try and make myself available face-to-face with them, and quite often they have very complex cases, so I give them extra time than what I would normally be able to do.
So it's affecting
but I haven't been able to go. It's massive effect.
Yeah,
for
of
a new
course.
member of Parliament, it's really important that residents see me out and about doing things and meeting people, and I've not been able to do that, and I can only apologise. Circumstances overtake. What I hope is that we come to next summer, And with all the village fetes and wonderful things that we do, that I'll be able to be out and about to those things. Businesses, you know, I try and pop in if I'm shopping in Guildford and what have you. I pop into the shops and I talk to, the owners and find out how things have been for them. And actually, we've done really well in retail in Guildford.
Okay.
It's been such a drive, and it's been wonderful. But you know, I will just do as much as I can. But a lot of the stuff I'm doing at the moment is very hidden. Because it's on Zoom meetings. It's like talking to you here.
Okay. Well, this won't be hidden, Angela. Oh, don't worry, it'll be publicised. So, finally, we've talked about this before, but localised stats on COVID, I think, are very important, obviously, because we're a local media outlet, so we would think that. But I think actually it is important because we know that we have to be very mindful of local spikes, etc., and get on top of them as soon as we can. With that in mind, wouldn't it be good if some of the stats were broken down more? What I'm thinking about in particular now, because there has been a lot of improvement, but recently they've released the hospital admissions, the COVID admissions, but we can only see them broken down as far as regions. And whilst actually it's a very hopeful story for the southeast region at the moment, the level is low of hospital admissions, only 13 the other day out of a population of 9.2 million. If we could see them locally in Guildford, I mean, we can get heat maps and things, but it would be really good to see it broken down to a local level. Are you able to help in that area?
Well, funnily enough, we've been having a lot of conversations, obviously, with renewing of the Coronavirus Act and the powers that it gives. I've been having lots of conversations behind the scenes to try and make sure that we can get as much information as we can, partly so that people are informed, so that they can have confidence, especially in, there are some difficult parts of the country and some really strict, strong measures and restrictions on civil liberties that, as a Conservative, I don't feel terribly comfortable with. I want people to have confidence to be able to get on with their lives and not be living in fear. So these local, this local detailed and precise stats would be really, really helpful for me, even as a constituency MP, to be able to try and give people a little bit more comfort about what they can do in their everyday lives. We did such a good job of telling people to stay at home that people have become quite fearful. And now that fear is not misguided or misplaced, because this virus that we're dealing with impacts different people in different ways, especially if you have comorbidities and you're of a certain age. And so we do need to protect parts of our population, but we also do need to free people out from their homes. It's so important for mental health that people are able to get out and about, to trust that they go on the public transport systems, that it will work. If they call a taxi, it will be okay, that there are regulations in place in shops, that they are clean, that you can use the hand sanitizer, and that wearing the face mask, that people feel more confident to go about their lives. So, I'm keen to keep exploring some of the things, the measures that we've put in place, and to debate those. 10 o'clock curfews on pubs, for instance, how effective are these measures? I want to see what the evidence is of some of the things that we've been doing. And I think it's really, really, really important that we've had this conversation in government where we can now have debates over quite substantial changes into national measures.
Yep.
But having those local stats would be just so helpful to me, and helpful, I think, to the local council in terms of some of the decisions that they're making about some of the events that they want to hold, that perhaps our Remembrance Sunday, more people can attend, because I know the council are being quite strict on it at the moment. But these are really important things that people value in the community, and that I would value being able to attend as well. So,
okay. Well, Angela, I'm sure if you mention it to the Prime Minister and say the Guildford Dragon is pushing for this, he'll get it done very quickly.
I'll do my best.
Angela Richardson, thank you very much again for your time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Martin.